cultural awareness and communication skills within the Chinese hotel industry, a professional development resource which aims to give you an understanding of certain differences between Chinese and Western cultures, covering specific and detailed topics that will guide your learning to help you feel more at ease in the Chinese hotel environment. The presentation covers matters such as communication, relationships, handling conflict, Confucian influence, and Hofstede's theory of cultural dimensions.
For each section of the video, there is a corresponding case study to be completed in the supplied workbook. This will allow you to apply the information we provide to a real-life work situation, which will help you to more comprehensively absorb the information and be prepared to work in a Chinese workplace.
The first topic we are discussing is communication. Communication is an important aspect of everyday life. Within the hotel industry, it is highly important that guests and other staff members understand you. Therefore, this video is relevant and will be helpful to you in your work overseas.
This section of the video will outline the main differences in communication between Western culture and Chinese culture. This includes direct versus indirect communication, the approach to the person-nature relationship, the origins of the language, and diverse workplaces. These are all differences between the two cultures that you will need to be aware of when working in the Chinese hotel industry.
Firstly, direct and indirect communication refers to the way in which Westerners and Chinese speak. Chinese communicate indirectly, whilst the Westerners use direct forms of communication. Communicating indirectly entails the Chinese being exceedingly polite, passive, and unwilling to confront others or ask for feedback. This can cause issues when communicating with Westerners, as they prefer to be assertive and to the point, which can be seen as rude by the Chinese.
Secondly, the person-nature relationship is viewed in different ways by the two cultures. Western culture emphasizes active mastery in the person-nature relationship, as opposed to the Chinese culture, which focuses on passive acceptance.
Lastly, miscommunication and misunderstanding is especially prominent within workplaces that are diverse in culture. This is because East-West differences in indirectness are more pronounced in work than in non-work scenarios. In order to overcome this, it is suggested that the organisation either creates a non-work schema within the workplace, or by discussing work within a non-work setting, as this will reduce miscommunication through the formation of core communication norms, processes, and expectations.
Now we're going to recap the communication section of the video before you complete the case study questions. The key points we covered in this section are as follows. Indirect and direct communication is a barrier when working cross-culturally, as Chinese communicate indirectly whilst Westerners communicate directly. Another issue can be where the language originated, as Western languages are derived from the Latin system and Chinese is pictographic. Diverse workplaces are likely to have multiple misunderstandings and miscommunications.
Now that the communication section of the video is finished, it is time for you to complete the case study section of your workbook. Pause the video and work through the cases, applying the knowledge you have learnt from this video to real-life situations.
The second topic we're going to discuss is relationships. How different cultures perceive relationships is an essential topic to be aware of. Within the hotel industry, it is important that the guests and other staff can understand the differences between how each culture views relationships differently, making the understanding of this video highly important and relevant to you.
This section of the video will outline the main differences in relationships between Western culture and Chinese culture. This includes horizontal versus vertical relationship styles and priorities of the two cultures. These are all differences between the two cultures that you will need to be aware of when working in the Chinese hotel industry.
Firstly, horizontal and vertical relationship styles refer to the way in which Westerners and Chinese relate to each other. Chinese and the Westerners differ in their relationships, as the Chinese culture promotes a vertical style and the Westerners prefer a horizontal relationship style. Horizontal relationships can be described as those with equality and democracy, which differs from the vertical style, which involves hierarchy and status.
Secondly, what each culture regards as most important can differ greatly across cultures. Chinese business people tend to base business decisions off relationships, however, Westerners prefer to be professional and base their business decisions on laws and contracts. The establishment and maintenance of relationships within a business setting are very different between Chinese and Western culture. It has been identified that the core of the business world in China relies on the relationships between people. Management style within China tends to be more conservative and human-based, whereas business in Australia is focused on more centralised, formalised processes based significantly on legal adversarial relationships than what is likely to be found in other countries. Therefore, business relationships in the West are more formal and legislation-based, whereas in the East are more based on the people involved.
Moreover, differences between Chinese and Western culture dictate the relationships. For example, a contract between businesses in Western countries can be expected to last longer than the relationships between businesses within Eastern countries. This difference is due to the fact that processes in the West are more formalized and legalized, whereas in the East, more are based on relationships and can therefore fluctuate with choices and changes of the parties involved. In order to preserve relationships, parties may choose to be indirect, especially when delivering criticism. The level of indirectness used is connected to relational concerns, the motivation to respond to communication cues to preserve interpersonal harmony, which are established through culture. Therefore, business relationships differ as a result of cultural dissimilarities between China and the West.
Now we are going to recap the relationships section of the video before you complete the case study questions. The key points we covered in this section are as follows: horizontal and vertical relationships, and how cultures prioritise business over relationships or vice versa. Now that the relationships section of the video is finished, it is time for you to complete the case study section of your workbook. Pause the video and work through the cases, applying the knowledge you have learned from this video to real life situations.
The next topic to be discussed in this video is handling of conflict. In any workplace, conflicts can arise between people. Within the hotel industry, there are often disputes between staff members or guests. This video is relevant and will be helpful to you in your work overseas when handling conflict.
This section of the video will outline the main differences in handling conflict between Western culture and Chinese culture. This includes whether the culture chooses a compromise or conflict, and whether they take a proactive or reactive approach to conflict. These are all differences between the two cultures that you will need to be aware of when working in the Chinese hotel industry.
Firstly, the Chinese, due to their Confucian roots, try to seek harmony and therefore will always choose a compromise over a confrontation. This differs from the Westerners, who ask for constant feedback and identify issues when they arise. Chinese and Western cultures can clash in a work environment, as both have different views on taking initiative. Chinese workers do not like to take initiative in the workplace, so as not to disrupt harmony. The Westerners often see this as being inattentive and avoiding responsibility, as they prefer to take action and initiative. This can often cause misunderstandings in the workplace, as the Chinese do not understand the Western need to take initiative and see it as disrupting harmony.
Secondly, conflict and how it is avoided is another significant difference between Chinese and Western culture. In the Western world, conflict seems to be encouraged as it becomes a way of understanding each other within a relationship. However, the Eastern world has a philosophy that encompasses harmony. This is exemplified within China, as the Chinese focus on enhancing the relationship rather than on avoiding conflict. They achieve this through positive thinking and the exploration of how the different parties within the relationship can work together harmoniously. During cross-cultural communication, people are more likely to save face for others and preserve interpersonal harmony through the use of indirect meaning. Therefore, conflict avoidance between those of Chinese and those of Western culture must be based on establishing and preserving harmony in order to enhance the relationship, as this is more constructive.
Now we're going to recap the handling conflict section of the video before you complete the case study questions. The key points we covered in this section are as follows. Chinese, due to their Confucian roots, try to seek harmony and therefore will always choose a compromise over a confrontation. This differs from Westerners, who ask for constant feedback and identify issues when they arise. In the Western world, conflict seems to be encouraged, as it becomes a way of understanding each other within a relationship. However, the Eastern world has a philosophy that encompasses harmony.
Now that the handling conflict section of the video is finished, it is time for you to complete the case study section of your workbook. Pause the video and work through the cases, applying the knowledge you have learnt from this video to real-life situations.
The next topic we'll talk about is Hofstede's theory of cultural dimensions and how it affects the everyday lives of people from every culture. Hofstede's theory of cultural dimensions identifies 4 dimensions that seek to highlight differences between cultures. These dimensions are power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and uncertainty avoidance. The 2 main aspects that differ between Chinese and Western culture are power distance and individualism versus collectivism.
Power distance is the extent to which a society equally distributes power in institutions and organisations. China and Western countries can have difficulties relating to each other due to their dissimilar views on power distribution. China has a high power distance, meaning that they accept the inequality of power and are reluctant to disagree with superiors. On the other hand, Westerners are less likely to tolerate class distinctions and are not afraid to disagree with their superiors. Chinese dislike dealing with authority in the workplace, which differs from the Westerners who openly discuss matters with higher-ups. This difference in culture can cause disputes within these diverse countries when communicating.
The notion of individualism versus collectivism impacts relationships between Chinese and Western people. In China, individuals are not important, rather the role played by the individual in a group is essential. Western culture values the individual, whereas Chinese culture focuses on a person's duties to a group. When the two cultures are in a work environment, there can be misunderstandings, as the Chinese have a desire to work as a group and the Westerners prefer to work individually. This dimension of cultural difference between these cultures can make understanding the actions of the other culture perplexing.
Approach refers to approaching members of different power status. Australians do not tend to treat people of higher power status differently. This Western quality is useful within the Chinese society as they'll undertake tasks such as approaching the CEO, something Easterners find difficult because of difference in power status. The most difficult challenge to overcome during cross-cultural communication is encouraging the Chinese to speak up, particularly in hierarchical scenarios, as this opposes their cultural beliefs of power dominance. Hence, the difference in values of approach between Chinese and Western culture can have positive effects on business scenarios and are due to culture.
Now we are going to recap the Hofstede's theory of cultural beliefs approach at the section of the video before you complete the case study questions. The key points covered in this section were as follows. Power distance, the extent to which a society equally distributes power in institutions and organizations. Individualism versus collectivism and how this impacts relationships between Western and Chinese people. And also that there is a difference between the way in which cultures approach members of power status. Now that the Hofstede's theory of cultural beliefs and approach section of the video is finished, it is time for you to complete the case study section of your workbook. Pause the video and work through the cases, applying the knowledge you have learnt from this video to real-life situations.
The final topic we are covering is Confucian influence. Chinese culture is heavily influenced by Confucian beliefs. This video will help you understand the importance of Confucius for the Chinese and aid you when you're working in the Chinese hotel industry.
Traditional Confucian customs often significantly impact the way the Chinese perceive everyday life, including aspects such as communication, relationships, and work. Hofstede stated that the key principles of Confucian teaching are based upon relationships and respect, the concept of a family rather than individuals, and the notion of treating others the way one would like to be treated themselves. These Confucian ways of Chinese differ from those of the Western people and could cause conflict in the workplace.
Now we are going to recap the Confucian influence section of the video before you complete the case study questions. The key points we cover in this section is as follows. Confucian influences affect the way Chinese approach life, which differs from Western life, and you need to be aware of this. Now that the Confucian influence section of the video is finished, it is time for you to complete the case study section of your workbook.
We hope that this video has helped you gain an insight into some cultural differences that it is vital to be aware of when making the transition from a Western hotel industry into a Chinese hotel industry.
We have provided a small survey for you to fill in for feedback on how we can improve this development resource for the future.